What if I told you there's a habit so powerful it could turn a janitor into a millionaire, without changing jobs, without moving cities, without changing anything but their mind? Sounds impossible, doesn't it? But the impossible is only impossible until someone makes it happen. And what I'm about to tell you might seem absurd, because it goes against everything you've been taught about success. Hard work doesn't make you rich. If that were true, the bricklayer who wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning would be a millionaire, and the nurse working double shifts wouldn't be burdened by debt. The truth is, success isn't born from physical effort. It's born from a mental frequency, and a single habit can tune you into that frequency. For many years, I lived believing that the harder I worked, the more success I would achieve. That's what the world told me, and it's what I saw in the people around me. So I did just that. I worked all day, pushed myself, sweated, tried to prove my worth, but nothing changed. I'd come home exhausted, hands dirty with grease, body tired, and soul empty. The money I earned barely covered the bills. I thought I was doing everything right, but deep down, something screamed that this couldn't be all there was. And if hard work truly was the secret, why were so many intelligent, dedicated people, who worked even more than I did, still trapped in debt and frustration? I remember waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, worried about the bills. The feeling of helplessness was like an anchor in my chest. I'd stare at the ceiling and ask myself, why isn't anything changing? What more do I need to do? I had been taught to believe that effort was the currency of reward, but the more I strived, the more money seemed to slip through my fingers. And then a thought began to torment me. What if the problem wasn't how much I was doing, but what I believed while doing it? It was at this point that I started to notice something curious. I saw people who didn't seem to work as hard as I did, but who had prosperity, freedom, and lightness. It was as if the world conspired in their favor, and for a while, I confess, it bothered me. I thought it was unfair, but with time I realized it wasn't luck or privilege, it was frequency. These people vibrated differently. They had a different relationship with money, with time, with life itself. While I lived worried, tense, fearing loss, they lived in gratitude, trusting, expecting the best. And that's when I realized something. Everything in the universe vibrates, including money. Modern physics confirms this. Nothing is truly solid. Every object, every body, every thought is made up of energy vibrating at different frequencies. When you're in a vibration of scarcity, fear, guilt, worry, you literally emit a frequency that repels abundance. It's like trying to tune into the wrong radio station and expecting to hear the right song. And the cruelest part is that most people do this without realizing it. They dwell on debts, complain about their salary, constantly repeat, money doesn't grow on trees, and then wonder why life is so difficult. I was exactly like that. I vibrated poverty even before I understood what vibration was. I'd wake up and my first thought was about what was missing. I'd fall asleep, and my last thought was about what I owed. I believed the world was against me, but in truth I was against the world, because my mind was emitting the opposite of what I wanted to attract. With every negative thought, I reinforced the cycle. Fear attracted more fear. Worry attracted more bills. And my reality couldn't be any different, because energy responds to what you feel, not to what you say you want. There was one particular night I'll never forget. I was sitting alone, looking at a pile of papers scattered across the table. Bills, overdue notices, collection letters. The silence was heavy. I felt the weight of failure, the shame of not succeeding. It was then that I looked at myself in the mirror and realized nothing outside of me would change until I changed within. There was no point blaming the government, my job, my boss. What I was attracting was the exact reflection of what I was vibrating. That was one of the hardest nights of my life, but also the beginning of my transformation. When you understand that everything is vibration, you begin to grasp the power you hold. Your body is an electromagnetic field, your thoughts are waves, your emotions are fuel. And when you combine a thought of abundance with an emotion of gratitude, the universe responds. I'm not talking about magic, I'm talking about physics. The human brain emits waves that interact with the environment, something studied for decades in neuroscience and quantum physics. When you sustain a vibration of prosperity for long enough, You literally start to attract situations and people that align with that state. I didn't understand this at first, which is why it took me so long to change. But today I know that what keeps most people stuck is the habit of thinking small, of vibrating scarcity, of believing it's not possible. They say, "I want to be rich," but deep down they don't believe it. And the true frequency is what you feel, not what you say. You can say, "I want to prosper," but if you feel fear, guilt, or doubt, the universe picks up on that. Think for a moment. How many times do you start the month with hope and end up frustrated, repeating the same patterns? How many times do you say you'll save money, but then something unexpected happens and the money just disappears? This isn't coincidence. It's your vibrational field creating realities compatible with what's inside you. You cannot have prosperity while vibrating lack. The day I realized this, everything began to change. I understood that success wasn't a matter of physical effort, but of mental alignment. I didn't need to work harder. I needed to think differently. It was like changing the dial on a radio station. The signal was already there. I just wasn't tuned in. And that's exactly what happens to most people. They struggle, push, force, but they're on the wrong station. And perhaps you're experiencing this right now. Maybe you push too hard, give your all, and still feel like nothing's moving forward. But the good news is, it's not a lack of capability. It's just a lack of frequency. And frequency can be changed with awareness. From the moment you start observing your thoughts and emotions, you can begin to choose what you want to emit. And when you change what you emit, you change what you receive. This was the true turning point in my life, understanding that the problem was never hard work, but the habit of thinking like someone who would never have what they desired. And when thought changes, everything changes. Because the outer world is merely a faithful reflection of what you vibrate within. That was the day something within me broke, and at the same time, something new began to emerge. I was tired of fighting against the current, tired of trying to understand why some people prospered with ease, while I seemed trapped in a never-ending cycle of effort and scarcity. It was then that I met a man who completely changed the course of my life. He didn't give me money, didn't offer me a job, didn't teach me a miraculous technique. He simply took a sheet of paper, drew a large S, and said, "This represents your results, and results never lie." In that moment, something hit me hard. He looked deep into my eyes and asked, "What have you been vibrating?" I didn't know how to answer. He then said, "What you feel every day is what creates your results." And I realized I had been vibrating scarcity, fear, worry, doubt. That's what I was emitting to the universe, and that's exactly what I was getting back. He taught me that to change my reality, I needed to change my vibration. And to change my vibration, I needed to create a new mental habit. He asked me to write down exactly what I wanted to achieve on a card. He told me not to think about how or when, just to write what my heart truly desired. At first I thought it was ridiculous. I had no diploma, no contacts, no future prospects. But even though I found it foolish, I decided to try. I took a simple piece of paper and wrote, "I want to earn $25,000. That seemed like an impossible dream. At the time, I barely earned enough to pay the bills, and the amount I put on paper was absurd for someone like me. But he told me, "It doesn't matter how much you believe right now. The important thing is to start." And so I did. I put that card in my pocket, and every day I read and reread those words. I didn't understand what I was doing, but I felt something different each time I read it. It was as if, for a few moments, I transported myself to a parallel reality, a version of me that had already achieved it. I read with conviction, and even though doubt still whispered within me, I began to notice a subtle change. I felt more confident, more excited, more alive. And little by little, the world began to respond. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. A new client, an unexpected conversation, a small opportunity I wouldn't have noticed before. It was as if the universe was testing my faith, asking, "Do you really believe in this?" And I kept reading the card every day. Over time, I realized something bigger was happening, not outside of me, but within. My focus began to shift. I stopped thinking about what was missing. and started thinking about what I wanted to create. This simple habit of reading a card every day seemed like a game, but it was the beginning of a profound reprogramming. I was feeding my mind with a new image, a new belief, and like any seed, it began to grow in silence. Before I knew it, I no longer thought like a limited man. I acted differently, spoke differently, saw myself differently. I no longer desperately chased opportunities. I attracted them. As the months passed, I started earning more money, even without immediately changing professions. It was as if the right ideas simply appeared at the right time. And when I finally decided to open my own business, everything flowed effortlessly. In the first year, I earned over $100,000. It was like waking up to a new reality. That simple phrase on a piece of paper had become the trigger for my transformation. Today, I understand that card wasn't just a motivational tool, it was an instrument of alignment. Every day it tuned me into the frequency of what I desired, forcing me to look forward instead of dwelling on the past. It made me feel as though success was already a natural part of who I was. And that's what most people don't understand. Habit isn't about writing goals, it's about building a new identity. When you commit to visualizing what you want, to affirming it daily, something begins to shift in your subconscious. Science clearly explains this. The brain doesn't distinguish imagination from reality. When you repeat a mental image with emotion, it starts to accept it as truth. And once it believes, it begins to act accordingly. This is the true magic of habit. It reprograms your internal system to align thoughts, emotions, and actions with the desired outcome. The man who taught me this knew what he was doing. He showed me that the difference between failure and prosperity lay in a simple act of daily focus. And I am living proof that it works. It all began with a card, a phrase, and the decision to read it every single day without fail. It wasn't luck, it wasn't coincidence. It was consistency. It was faith in action. It was the power of a new habit transforming into a new life. And if you stop to think about it, perhaps you've already done something similar before, even without realizing it. Perhaps you've mentally replayed the fear of not succeeding, the worry of failing, the belief that life is hard. And guess what? Those are habits too. Only they are habits of scarcity. The secret is to replace them with habits of prosperity, because the brain needs something to believe in, and you are the one who chooses what it will focus on. At that time, I knew nothing about quantum physics, vibration, or neuroscience. I just knew something inside me told me to keep going, and as I persisted, I discovered that the universe doesn't respond to what you want, but to what you consistently vibrate. That small piece of paper was my daily reminder that I could be more, that the world wasn't against me. I just needed to align my inner self with what I wished to experience. Over time, I realized the habit had become a part of me. I no longer needed to force the belief. I simply believed, and it was at that point that everything clicked into place. When you believe without resistance, energy flows, doors open, and things happen almost naturally. And that's how the impossible ceased to be impossible. It all started with a simple act of faith, repeated every day, the habit that transformed my frequency, my mind, and my life. It was during this phase that I began to understand that the human mind is far more powerful than any tool, degree, or technique the world can offer. I realized that my brain functioned exactly like a magnet. It attracted everything I kept alive within my thoughts with emotional intensity. Each time I read that card and saw myself earning $25,000, I wasn't just dreaming. I was emitting a specific frequency, a vibration, and that vibration was shaping the field of possibilities around me. For a long time, I thought this was coincidence, a matter of optimism. But as I began to study and observe, I realized there was something deeper and more real happening. Science calls this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, create new connections, and strengthen mental circuits based on what we repeat. And the more I repeated that mental image, the more familiar it became to my nervous system. It was as if I were teaching my brain to recognize abundance as something normal, natural, possible. With each reading of my card, the thought grew a little stronger, and with it, the emotion also shifted. From doubt, it turned to hope. From hope, it turned to confidence, and from confidence, action was born. I started behaving like someone who had already achieved it. My words changed, my tone of voice changed, the way I presented myself changed. And it was precisely this that began to open doors. People started seeing me differently, opportunities began to emerge, and suddenly I was living what had once only been an idea written on a piece of paper. The human brain doesn't differentiate between what's real and what's intensely imagined. That's why high-performance athletes visualize their victories before competing, and successful entrepreneurs visualize success before materializing it. The body reacts to what the mind believes. When I read my card and saw myself living that scenario, my body produced the same physiological responses as someone who had already achieved it. My nervous system adapted to the new vibration. The emotion of success began to replace fear, and this energetic shift put me in the right state to perceive opportunities that had always been there, but which I couldn't see when I was trapped in scarcity. This is exactly what most people don't understand. They think they need to see to believe, but the process is the opposite. You need to believe to see. The brain filters reality based on the beliefs you hold. And as long as I believed success was for others, I simply didn't see the possible paths. But when I started to believe it was possible for me, my perceptual system, the same one scientists call the reticular activating system, began to work in my favor. It started selecting information, people, and situations that were in tune with my new frequency. It's like when you decide to buy a car of a certain color and model, and suddenly you start seeing it everywhere. It was always there, but now you perceive it because your mind is calibrated for it. The same happens with success. When your mind aligns with the frequency of prosperity, it starts to pick up everything that is in harmony with it. And when that happens, you no longer need to chase things. They begin to chase you. I remember a time when I started receiving invitations to speak, something I had never imagined. I didn't seek out these opportunities, they simply arose. People told me they sensed a different energy in me, a conviction, something that inspired them. And all I had done was change what I thought every single day. My new vibration spoke even before my words did. It was a reminder that the universe doesn't respond to effort, but to frequency. But don't think this happened overnight. In the beginning, my mind resisted. I would read the card, and an inner voice would say, "This is nonsense, it won't work." That's the voice of the old paradigm, the old identity that wants to keep you trapped in the familiar. But every time I ignored that voice and persisted, I weakened the old pattern and strengthened the new. Each repetition was like laying a new layer of cement on the foundation of my new reality. And over time, the structure became solid enough to support the new self that was emerging. Today I understand that daily habit was more than a practice. It was a way to tune my body and mind to what I wanted to experience. Everything in the universe is energy, and energy connects through similarity. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. And I was becoming someone who vibrated abundance, someone who believed, felt, and acted as if they had already achieved it. When I realized my brain was programmed to create realities from what I repeated, I understood that all of us possess this power. But few use it consciously. Most people repeat scarcity, complain, talk about problems, reinforce what they don't want, and without realizing it, they create more of the same. It was then that I understood the mind is like a garden. If you don't plant what you want, weeds grow on their own. I started planting new ideas, and they blossomed into results. Neuroscience proves that repeated thoughts activate the same brain areas until permanent pathways are formed. These pathways become automatic patterns, and patterns become behaviors. When you change the pattern, you change the trajectory of your life. And that's exactly what happened to me. My brain, once accustomed to worry, became accustomed to confidence. Once prepared to react to fear, it began to react to opportunity. And the more I vibrated in that energy, the more it grew. The brain is indeed a magnet, but you are the one who chooses what it attracts. And when I understood this deeply, I stopped trying to control the world and began to focus on controlling my vibration. Because when the mind changes, the energy changes, and when the energy changes, the entire world shifts along with it. Over time, I realized there was something much deeper determining my results. It wasn't how much I knew nor how hard I tried, but what I silently believed about myself and what I deserved. This invisible set of beliefs, patterns, and conditionings is what I call a paradigm. It's like an autopilot that commands every decision, every reaction, and even the limit of success a person can achieve. You can change jobs, change cities, change relationships, but if the underlying paradigm remains the same, sooner or later, everything will revert to how it was. This paradigm begins to form in the earliest years of life, when the mind is still completely open, unfiltered, absorbing everything as absolute truth. During childhood, we hear phrases like, "Money doesn't buy happiness," "You have to work extremely hard to achieve anything," "Rich people are greedy," and without realizing it, these ideas become part of our mental framework. And as we grow older, we end up living exactly in accordance with them, never once questioning them. It's like a program installed in the background, dictating everything, even when we believe we're in control. I've seen this happen countless times, even with people who seem to have everything going for them. I recall a woman who came up to me after a lecture. She had received an enormous sum in a lawsuit, roughly $10 million. For the first time in her life, she had more money than she had ever imagined. And yet, 2 years later, she was deep in debt again. Everything had vanished. When we spoke, she told me something I've never forgotten. I didn't know how to handle so much. I didn't feel comfortable. And in that instant, I understood that money doesn't change the paradigm. It merely exposes it. Money can amplify who you are, but it doesn't transform what you believe. This woman had spent her entire life resonating with scarcity. Suddenly, her bank account was full, but her subconscious still believed she didn't deserve it. And that's what happens to many people. They get a raise, land an opportunity, start a promising business, but something inside them pulls them back. They spend unconsciously, procrastinate, make impulsive decisions. And all of this is the paradigm at work, attempting to restore internal balance to the level the person believes is their natural standard. I experienced this conflict myself. When I started to prosper, deep down there was a part of me that felt out of place. I had spent so much time seeing myself as ordinary, as someone who merely survives, that success felt strange. It was as if I were wearing clothes that didn't fit me. This discomfort is the first sign that the old paradigm is being challenged. And if the person isn't conscious of it, they unknowingly sabotage themselves. They start overspending, doubting themselves, seeking distractions, or even creating crises to return to their old comfort zone. And the most interesting thing is that to the mind, this self-sabotage seems logical. It says this is too good to be true, things don't last. It's better not to risk it. And little by little, the new pattern is rejected, and the old one reinstalls itself. That's why so many people live in cycles. They advance a little, then retreat, always returning to the same point. Because the paradigm is like an internal thermostat. If you try to go beyond the temperature it's programmed for, it automatically activates the cooling system and brings you back to the familiar level. Real change begins when you recognize this mechanism and consciously decide to reprogram it. But this requires vigilance. The paradigm doesn't surrender easily because it's made up of mental, emotional, and behavioral habits repeated for years. It's a structure created to keep you safe within what is familiar. And what's familiar to most people is limitation, not freedom. So, when you start to think big, to feel worthy, to visualize abundance, the paradigm reacts. It tries to pull you back, saying it's dangerous, that it's selfish, that you're going too far. But that's precisely where transformation begins, when you feel fear and yet still advance. For years, I studied people who broke paradigms and noticed something fascinating. All of them had a breakthrough moment, a point where they consciously decided to leave their old self behind. It wasn't luck. It was a decision. They confronted the internal voices that said, "You can't, you don't deserve it," and pressed on regardless. And as they repeated new thoughts, new behaviors, and new emotions, the brain began to reorganize itself. Neuroscience proves this. Each repetition reinforces a new neural pathway, and when that pathway strengthens enough, it becomes the new pattern. The truth is that changing the paradigm is like learning a new language. At first, you feel strange, insecure, you stumble, you make mistakes. But with time, you start to think naturally in this new language. The difference is that in this case, the language you learn is one of abundance, confidence, and deservingness. And the more you practice, the more fluent you become. I often say that the paradigm is the filter between you and the life you desire. Everything you perceive, interpret, and feel passes through it. And if this filter is distorted by limiting beliefs, no matter how much you try to change the exterior, you'll always see the same scenario. The only way to see a new world is by changing the internal observer. Understanding this was liberating for me. When I realized that the problem wasn't the world, but the way I was conditioned to perceive it, I regained the power I had surrendered to circumstances. Because if it's the mind that creates the limit, it's also the mind that can remove it. And that's precisely what I started to do. I replaced thoughts of fear with thoughts of faith, doubts with gratitude, scarcity with abundance. With each repetition, the old paradigm weakened and the new one solidified. From then on, I understood that the secret to growth isn't accumulating information, but transforming the way you think and feel, because knowledge only has value when it breaks the old pattern and creates a new one. That's what liberated me, and that's what liberates anyone. What you believe about yourself defines the scope of your life. And when you change the paradigm, you don't just change what you have, you change who you are. When money started coming in, I thought the worst was over. I believed that from then on everything would be light, easy, and calm. But what happened was precisely the opposite. Prosperity didn't bring me immediate peace. Instead, it brought to the surface everything that was still unresolved within me. I found myself at elegant dinners in luxurious hotels with influential people, but inside I felt out of place, as if I didn't belong there. It was a strange feeling, a discomfort I couldn't explain. I had achieved what once seemed impossible, and even so, a part of me whispered, "You don't belong in this world. This isn't for you." And it was at that point that I realized how treacherous the mind can be. Because success isn't just an external achievement. It is, first and foremost, an internal acceptance. And if you don't see yourself as worthy of something, sooner or later you'll find a way to lose it. I've seen this happen not only to myself, but to many people. They achieve what they want, but they can't sustain it. Why? Because their subconscious is still clinging to the old identity. They don't see themselves as successful people, and their body, mind, and decisions adjust to that belief. In my case, I started to self-sabotage unconsciously. I spent money on unnecessary things, made impulsive decisions, as if testing the limits of what I could lose. It was an unconscious cycle of self-destruction. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a man who had changed his life but still thought like that insecure young man, who saw himself as too small for the world he dreamed of conquering. And the more I tried to prove otherwise, the more the fear grew. It was the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, the fear of not deserving what I had. I began to realize that for many people, success isn't hard to achieve. The challenge is allowing oneself to keep it. And this happens because the mind is accustomed to pain, struggle, and effort. When something starts to flow easily, the person feels uneasy. They think it's wrong, that it will end at any moment. And what do? They create problems. This is the most dangerous trap of success, self-sabotage disguised as prudence. You tell yourself you're just being realistic, when in reality you're merely retreating to what is familiar. Once, after a large event that had been an absolute triumph, I returned to the hotel and felt empty. I should have been radiant, but I felt a knot in my stomach. It was as if something within me was saying I was going too far, that at some point everything would collapse. That's when I understood that for success to be lasting, it needs to be accompanied by a new consciousness. It's not enough to change your bank balance. You need to change your self-image. Because the universe won't give you something you don't believe you deserve to keep. Many people believe they're afraid to fail, but the truth is that the deepest fear is of having success. Because success demands that you become a new person. It takes you out of the known and forces you to inhabit a new version of yourself, and that's frightening. That's why so many people give up when they're on the verge of making a leap. They say they're tired, that they need a break, but in reality what they feel is resistance to expansion. They've become accustomed to living in scarcity, and success makes them feel like strangers in their own lives. I had to learn to live with this discomfort. I needed to look within and ask, why do I feel this way? Why do I believe I don't belong here? And the answer was painful, because I still carried the beliefs of who I had been. The boy who believed that money was dangerous, that rich people were selfish, that the good life was a privilege for a select few. These ideas were deeply rooted, and each achievement made them scream louder, urging me to return to the safe, to the normal. But I realized that going back would mean betraying my own evolution. So instead of fleeing from discomfort, I began to embrace it. I understood it as a sign of growth, an indication that I was expanding beyond the confines of my old self. Whenever I felt small, I reaffirmed to myself that I deserved to be there. That success didn't transform me into a different person. It simply unveiled what had always resided within me. Over time, that sensation of discomfort began to morph into power. Because when you accept success, it ceases to be something external you tirelessly pursue, and instead becomes a natural expression of who you genuinely are. I started to grant myself permission to be prosperous, permission to be happy, permission to live in abundance without guilt. And it was at that pivotal moment that money ceased to be a burden and transformed into an extension of my energy. Self-sabotage vanishes when you grasp that thriving isn't a matter of luck or chance, it's a matter of identity. You need to perceive yourself as someone who is already deserving. For the mind cannot retain what the heart rejects. And as long as you believe you are unworthy, the universe will find ways to affirm that conviction. But when you resolve to change that image, when you begin to see yourself as capable, valuable, and sufficient, everything around you reorganizes to mirror this new truth. That's how I stopped fighting against myself. I understood that the true challenge wasn't about conquering more, but rather about allowing myself to receive what I had already attracted. Prosperity had always been ready for me. What was missing was me being ready for it. And perhaps that's the juncture many find themselves at now, poised between the old self that fears and the new self that yearns to soar. The difference lies in whom you choose to listen to. Because success doesn't come to those who work the hardest. It comes to those who finally believe they deserve it. There came a point when I realized that merely understanding the mind or studying the laws of the universe wasn't enough. It was necessary to act practically, to create an anchoring point in the physical world, something that would transform theory into habit and habit into reality. That's when I began doing something incredibly simple, yet profoundly powerful. I took a piece of paper and wrote down the words that would change my life. I am so happy and grateful now because... And I completed the sentence with what I genuinely yearned to experience. Not what seemed possible, nor what seemed reasonable, but what my heart truly desired. I had no idea how it would come to pass, but I realized that the how was never my job. My role was to feel as if it had already happened. At first it seemed like just an exercise in imagination, but I soon realized the profound impact it had within me. With each reading of that phrase, I felt my vibration shift. My thoughts became clearer, my body lighter, and a sense of unwavering confidence began to blossom within me. It was as if I was connecting an invisible thread between what I dreamed of and what was on the verge of manifesting. And the more I read, the more the world responded. Small synchronicities began to emerge, unexpected calls, opportunities that seemed to materialize out of thin air, people appearing with the exact answers I needed. And it all started with that simple act of writing and reading every single day, without fail. The truth is, this practice is a potent way to train your brain. Neuroscience explains that the brain doesn't differentiate between a real experience and one intensely visualized. When you write something down and feel genuine emotion, you activate the same neural networks that would be engaged if it were truly happening. This is precisely why this technique is so powerful. It doesn't just persuade your conscious mind, it reprograms your subconscious, and it is the subconscious that ultimately shapes the outcomes of your life. Many people underestimate its power because it appears too simple. They believe they require complex plans, intricate formulas, or elaborate strategies. But the secret has always resided in consistency. Reading that paper every single day, with emotion and clear intention, is akin to planting a seed and watering it with unwavering faith. And the universe responds to faith, not to doubt. When you begin to genuinely feel that you already are, already have, and already live what you desire, your vibration shifts completely. You start to act, think, and decide as the person who has already achieved it. And it is this transformation in behavior that generates the momentum we often refer to as luck. But there's one crucial point few discuss. For this practice to truly work, commitment is paramount. It's futile to do it for just 1 week and then give up. It's a daily commitment to your new self. I read my card every morning, even before getting out of bed, and again at night before falling asleep. I read it aloud, with emotion, until I could feel that every word was real. Sometimes I found myself deeply moved, as if I were already experiencing it. Other times, fear would try to creep in, whispering, "What if none of this actually happens?" But it was in those very moments that I reminded myself that doubting is akin to planting seeds in barren soil. That's why I began teaching this practice to others, because I witnessed the remarkable results not only in myself, but in them as well. I saw individuals who were financially adrift find clarity. I saw entrepreneurs on the brink of bankruptcy steer their businesses back on course. I saw couples reconnecting. I saw people regaining faith in themselves. It all started with a simple phrase and a single piece of paper. And if you're listening to me now, I want you to grasp this. This is the moment to act. Take a piece of paper right now and write, "I am so happy and grateful now because," and complete it with what you genuinely desire. Don't concern yourself with realism. If your dream doesn't give you butterflies, it's simply too small. Write as if you are already living it, as if it is already true. Then place that paper where you can see it every day, in your wallet, on your mirror, in your pocket. Read it in the morning, read it at night. Read it whenever doubt creeps in, and feel. Feel as if it is already an integral part of your life. Now, if by this point you feel something stirring within you, a new energy beginning to emerge, I want to ask you a favor. If this message resonates, subscribe to the channel now and hit the like button. Not for me, but for you, as a symbolic gesture, a commitment to your own transformation. This is more than just a video. It's a new choice. Remember, the brain operates through repetition and emotion. And the more you reiterate what you desire, the more your subconscious begins to accept it as reality. This is how faith transforms into certainty, and certainty into manifestation. The practice might seem small, but it is within it that the miracle truly begins. You don't need to know how it will happen. You just need to believe deeply enough to act as if it is already real. Because the universe doesn't respond to urgency, it responds to vibration. And when you vibrate gratitude for what is yet to arrive, you actively anticipate the future and draw it into your present moment. That's how my life began to align with everything I had always dreamed of. I stopped chasing things and started becoming someone compatible with them. And that's exactly what I want you to do too. Become compatible with the life you desire. Read your paper, feel every word, and maintain your focus, even when nothing seems to be happening. Because it is precisely in that stillness that the invisible begins to stir. And one day, when you least expect it, you will look around and realize you are living exactly what you wrote. It was during this phase that I began to truly grasp the profound power of focus. I realized that the human mind is akin to an antenna. It captures and amplifies whatever it chooses to concentrate on. What you focus on grows. What you ignore dissipates. The problem is that most people spend their lives with their focus fixated on what they don't want. The bills, the fear, the problems, the perceived lacks. And the brain, being as obedient as it is, consistently transforms this into a constant reality. I used to do the same. I'd wake up thinking about difficulties and go to sleep worried about what was missing. It was as if my mind was programmed to seek out the worst-case scenario in everything. But when I started cultivating the habit of visualizing what I genuinely desired, I noticed that something invisible began to work in my favor. There's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. It's responsible for filtering the millions of pieces of information we receive every day and selecting what truly matters to us. This system acts like the mind's gatekeeper. It allows through only what you deem relevant. And do you know what defines relevance? What you frequently think about. That's why when you decide to buy a new car, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere. It was always there, but only now do you perceive it because your mind has adjusted its focus. The same holds true for success, for love, for prosperity. They have always been surrounding you, but you'll only notice them when you tune your attention to them. This is precisely what happened to me. When I began to focus on possibilities and opportunities rather than dwelling on difficulties, doors started to open. Not because the world itself changed, but because my perspective shifted. Initially, I had to force myself to do it. The old habit of concentrating on the negative was deeply ingrained. It was as if my mind actively sought reasons to prove to me that nothing would work out. But every time I noticed that pattern, I consciously shifted my focus. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" I started asking, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of thinking, "I don't have enough money," I began to think, "How can I increase my income?" And that simple shift in questioning transformed everything. Because the brain is a machine that seeks answers, and when you change the question, you change the path to the answer. I began applying this principle to every area of my life. When things went awry, I'd take a deep breath and redirect my focus. It wasn't easy, because the mind always tries to pull you back into old patterns. But over time, this new focus became second nature. And then I started noticing synchronicities, opportunities that seemed to fall from the sky. The right people appearing at just the right moment. Today I know it wasn't coincidence. It was my reticular activating system doing its job, filtering reality according to what I was vibrating with and focusing on. The mind doesn't create from nothing. It manifests what you're prepared to see. And when you shift your focus, you shift your perception of the world. People often say, "I'll believe it when I see it," but the truth is, you only see what you believe. If you believe the world is difficult, you'll see obstacles around every corner. If you believe the world is full of opportunities, you'll start to see them in every conversation, every chance encounter, every little detail. There was a time when this theory truly became real for me. I was going through a period of professional transition, uncertain about what lay ahead. Instead of giving in to fear, I began to mentally visualize the kind of opportunity I wanted to attract, something that would allow me to teach, grow, and serve. Every day I imagined myself living that experience, and I kept my attention firmly fixed, even without knowing how it would happen. 3 weeks later, I received an invitation to deliver a lecture. It was exactly the type of experience I had been visualizing. It wasn't coincidence, it was focus. But there's something important people need to understand. Focus isn't just about thinking about what you want, it's about feeling it. It's about keeping your gaze fixed even when nothing seems to be happening. It's about resisting the temptation to look back, to get distracted by what went wrong, to feed doubt. Focus is a form of faith. It's believing so strongly in something that the physical world has no choice but to align. The most successful people I've met share this same trait. They have unwavering focus. No matter what happens, they keep their eyes on where they want to go. They don't get distracted by criticism or temporary setbacks. They understand that everything that happens along the way is just a test to prove how much you truly want what you say you want. Focus, when practiced consistently, becomes a magnetic force. It reorganizes chaos, gives direction to what once seemed random, and makes the impossible seem natural. And the more you keep your attention on something, the more energy you direct towards it. Energy flows where attention goes. And the universe responds to energy, not just words. That's why I learned to protect my focus like a precious treasure. I stopped paying attention to negative news, to draining conversations, to people who only spoke of limitations. I started feeding my mind only with what reinforced my new vision, books, ideas, experiences, everything that raised my vibration. In time, I realized that focus isn't just a mental tool, it's a spiritual choice. It's the act of telling the universe, "This is what I want and I won't settle for less." And it was this conscious choice, repeated day after day, that put me on a path to increasingly greater results. Because when you learn to direct your focus, you stop being a victim of circumstances and become the creator of your own reality. Nothing external needs to change, only what you decide to see. And when you change what you see, the whole world changes with you. I remember that day perfectly. He was sitting in the first row, shoulders slumped, looking weary. When we finished the lecture, he approached me and said with a frustrated look, "Bob, it's easy to talk about prosperity when you have money, but I can barely pay my rent. How am I supposed to think about abundance when I'm living in scarcity?" And in that instant, I saw in his eyes the same despair that once resided in my own. That man was the living embodiment of the most limiting belief there is, the idea that we need to have something before we allow ourselves to feel and think as if we already possess it. I looked at him and calmly replied, "That's precisely why you need to start now. When you change what you feel, you change what you attract." He stood in silence, half incredulous, as if it were a provocation. But time proved it wasn't. He began to apply exactly what I taught. Every morning before leaving for work, he dedicated a few minutes to imagining himself living the life he desired. At first, his mind resisted. He told me later that it felt ridiculous to think about prosperity while counting coins for the bus. But still, he persisted. Each day, a small fragment of old belief dissolved, and a new thought took root. He started dressing better, speaking with more confidence, engaging with his boss as an equal. Without realizing it, he was becoming the version of himself he wished to be, even before reality confirmed it. And that's precisely when the universe begins to conspire. A few months later, an unexpected opportunity arose. An old friend referred him for an opening at a small maintenance company. He almost refused, saying he had no experience, but this time something inside him pushed him forward. He was hired. In less than 1 year, he went from employee to partner. The man who once struggled to pay rent was now earning over $10,000 per month. And when he met me again, he said something I've never forgotten. "Bob, nothing on the outside changed until I changed on the inside." That made me smile, because it was exactly the point so many people still don't understand. Prosperity isn't a prize someone grants you. It's a state of mind you awaken within yourself. Perhaps you too have felt stuck like him, believing that circumstances control everything, that it's your salary, the government, the economy, or even bad luck that determines your destiny. But let me ask you something. How many times have you heard stories of people who started with nothing and achieved everything? What made them different? A degree? Influential contacts? Or was it the ability to imagine something better, even when the whole world said it couldn't be done? That is vibration. And that vibration is born from persistent thought, from that habit of seeing yourself where you want to be, even when the mirror still shows you where you are. The human mind doesn't distinguish between what is real and what is intensely imagined. Every mental image repeated with emotion is an order sent to the subconscious. And the subconscious is what directs your actions, your behavior, your stance toward life. That's what happened to that man. He didn't gain a supernatural power. He simply began to act in harmony with the image of prosperity he created. And when action changes, reality responds. Science explains this simply. The brain has a mechanism called the reticular activating system, responsible for filtering information. When you define a focus, this system starts to recognize and select, amidst thousands of daily stimuli, everything that connects to your goal. That's why, when you decide to buy a car, you start seeing it everywhere. It was always there, but now your mind is tuned to perceive it. The same happens with opportunities. When you change your mental frequency, opportunities that once seemed invisible begin to leap out at you. They don't emerge from nowhere. You are the one who finally starts to see them. What once seemed like coincidence now becomes synchronicity. The right people appear, ideas emerge, and what seemed distant begins to draw closer in an almost magical way. But it's not magic, it's law. It's the reflection of what you allow yourself to feel, and that's what that man did. He stopped vibrating with scarcity and started vibrating with certainty. Not because his bank account had changed, but because his mind had already shifted first. And the world inevitably had to follow suit. I always say, you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. Which means that as long as you see yourself as limited, the universe will continue to prove you right. But when you see yourself as prosperous, capable, and worthy, the universe confirms that too. Change doesn't start in your pocket, it starts in your mind. That's why people who wait to have before they believe never get there. The secret is to reverse the path, believe before you have, because everything created on the physical plane first existed on the mental plane. That's how success is born, first in the mind, then in the world. So when someone tells me they can't think about prosperity because they're in debt, I smile and think, that's precisely why you need to. Prosperity isn't a reward, it's a frequency. And when you decide to tune into it, no matter where you're starting from, the universe finds a way to put you on the right path. It was that way with me. It was that way with that man. And it can be that way with you too. Mike Tyson's story is one of the most striking I've ever observed about the power of paradigm. Here was a man who earned over $300 million in a single lifetime. He had everything the world typically calls success: fame, fortune, power, influence. But despite all of that, he lost absolutely everything. And when someone loses something so immense, it's not just due to bad decisions or bad luck. It's because his subconscious was still programmed for scarcity, for fear, for suffering. Deep down, he was still the boy from a difficult childhood, surrounded by violence, guilt, and distrust. He believed, even without realizing it, that pain was more familiar than abundance. And the universe always responds to what you believe to be true, not to what you consciously desire. Tyson's mind resonated with scarcity, and the outcome was unavoidable. He manifested externally precisely what existed within. This serves as proof that money, by itself, never solves the issue of scarcity. It merely amplifies what is already present within you. If you possess a prosperous mindset, money transforms into a multiplier of opportunities. But if your thoughts are rooted in lack, it becomes an amplifier of insecurity. It's like pouring water into a cracked glass. No matter how much you pour, it will always leak out. The glass represents the paradigm, and until it's mended, the contents will continue to be lost. Tyson didn't lose everything because he couldn't fight or invest. He lost it because he never believed he deserved to keep it. His body was at its peak, yet his mind still resided in the basement. On the flip side, we find a completely contrasting example. Oprah Winfrey, a woman who emerged from extreme poverty, scarred by abuse, rejection, and discrimination. Everything seemed to conspire against her. But there came a pivotal moment when she made a simple yet profound decision that her circumstances would not define her. She shifted her way of thinking, and the world had no choice but to shift with her. Oprah grasped early on that one's internal vibration shapes external reality. Instead of perceiving herself as a victim, she began to see herself as a creator. She started to nourish her mind with concepts of abundance, gratitude, and purpose. And the more she did so, the more opportunities unfolded before her. Today, she stands as one of the planet's most influential and triumphant women, not due to mere chance, but because she aligned her mental frequency with prosperity. When we place these two narratives side by side, an undeniable truth emerges. Success isn't about what you acquire, but what you are capable of sustaining internally. Tyson attained everything he yearned for, yet his underlying paradigm inevitably drew him back to the place where he subconsciously believed he belonged. Oprah, conversely, elevated her point of attraction and fashioned a reality in alignment with this new conviction. The divergence lies not in talent or opportunities, it resides in the level of consciousness. Each received the precise reflection of their predominant vibration, and this is why countless individuals accumulate vast fortunes only to lose them swiftly, while others forge enduring empires from seemingly nothing. The human mind operates much like a thermostat. If you set the thermostat to 20 degrees and the external temperature rises to 30, the system automatically endeavors to bring it back down to the programmed setting. The same principle applies to your prosperity. You might earn an immense sum, inherit a fortune, or even win the lottery. But if your mental thermostat is calibrated for scarcity, your subconscious will exert every effort to return you to the pattern it deems as your default. This manifests as poor decisions, procrastination, fear of investing, self-sabotage, and guilt. The mind seeks the solace of the familiar, even if that familiarity is pain. Altering this demands courage, for it entails relinquishing one's old identity. It's akin to shedding a heavy coat on a chilly day. Initially, it feels uncomfortable, perhaps even perilous. But with perseverance, the body adjusts. Oprah didn't ascend to become one of the world's foremost communication leaders merely due to talent. She did so because she reprogrammed herself to resonate with success. She diligently cultivated the habit of thinking expansively, of envisioning a future where her voice would possess power and purpose. And eventually that vision materialized as inevitable. These two distinct trajectories illustrate that no one is condemned by their circumstances, but rather by the beliefs they choose to uphold. And the encouraging news is that beliefs are malleable. Neuroscience demonstrates the brain's plasticity. It reshapes itself according to thought patterns. Every new idea imbued with emotion and repeated forges a fresh neural connection, a new mental pathway. This is precisely what Oprah accomplished and what Tyson never grasped. And perhaps on some fundamental level, this defines the disparity between losing everything and multiplying everything. The mind stands as the genesis of every outcome. You cannot sow seeds of fear and anticipate a harvest of prosperity. And if life has imparted any lesson to me, it is that the universe invariably strives for balance. It doesn't bestow upon you what you claim to desire, but rather what you are currently emanating. This explains why numerous individuals reach the pinnacle, yet fail to sustain their position there. For the pinnacle isn't a physical location, it's a state of mind. Authentic wealth commences when your mind evolves into a soil fertile enough to nurture abundance. Once you grasp this truth, you realize that the secret was never in money, labor, or opportunities. It consistently resided within you. Life perpetually presents us with mirrors. And when you begin to perceive the narratives of individuals like Tyson and Oprah, not merely as illustrations, but as evocations of what also resides within you, everything undergoes a transformation. For at its core, each one of us possesses the capacity to rewrite our own narrative. We simply need to tune in to the correct frequency. Perhaps someone you know is currently grappling with precisely this internal conflict, torn between the fear of loss and the aspiration for victory. Therefore, consider sharing this video with that person. It might just be the very message they need to hear to alter the course of their own life. I extend my heartfelt gratitude for staying with me until this point, and I want you to know that I eagerly await your presence in the next video, for there remains so much more for us to explore together.